In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, you are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm Eric.
And I'm Rory, reporting for the BBC here in the UK.
I'm honestly really disappointed that you didn't go with the BBC English, man. Yeah, how come you didn't do the BBC English accent?
Well, if you're paying me, then I'm Rory, reporting for the BBC.
Perfect. That's what I'm looking for. I think there was one British person in this film, like right at the end. I heard a slight accent. I was like, that was not an American reporter. It's like, and joining us today, we also have longtime Patron Saint and popcorn theologian Daniel Elias. So, Daniel, tell us a little bit about yourself and what interested you in Vietnam.
I'm Daniel. I've been with the show since well before the Zucker Purge a million years ago. Remember that?
Yeah.
Been a fan for a long time. All the changes and everything. I've been in the comments. I think I forced Blue Ruin on everybody, which
I fully got on board with, Daniel. So I was quite glad. Yeah,
you're one of the good ones.
I think that was a funny enough. Is that them covering that is what made me become a patron saint, so that could never ever happen again. I was like, all right. There were a couple that got like under the wire, and I was like, why are we covering movies no one cares about? Yeah. And then I became patron saint, and yeah. So, Danny, tell us a little bit, like, what's your interest and background with the Vietnam War?
Well, that's the weird thing, is there's no real background. I'm not exactly sure where it came from. Best I can trace it back to is a heavily edited for TV version of Rambo.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the second one 1,000 times, which is like one step above a cartoon when it's edited. And finally, my parents kind of forced me to watch First Blood, and I thought, oh, this is really about something. And this goes back to something actually pretty intense and kind of upsetting and kind of enraging in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, that just stuck with me, and I've been into it ever since, I guess. It's a terrible way to talk about a war, but I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, excellent. And so, Rory, what are we covering, and what are we looking at today?
Good question. Well, we're looking at We Were Soldiers, which is directed by Randall Wallace and starring Mel Gibson, Madeleine Stowe, Greg Kinnear, Sam Elliott, Chris Klein, Kerry Russell, Barry Pepper, and Don Durong. Sorry if I got that one right here. And 2002 film, We Were Soldiers, dramatizes the brutal 1965 Battle of Ia Drang, the first major engagement between American and North Vietnamese forces. It's adapted from Lieutenant Colonel Moore's book, We Were Soldiers, Once and Young, which I actually did read for university once. And Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore is played by Mel Gibson, who leads his ill-prepared 7th Cavalry troopers into the Valley of Death, much like Custer did lead his forces at the Battle of Little Bighorn. There's parallels there. Where they are immediately surrounded and vastly outnumbered by 4,000 enemy soldiers. And the film highlights that the intense close quarters combat on the ground and the desperate fight for the survival and the impact of the casualties on the wives waiting anxiously back home. And ultimately, it is a tribute to the courage and confidence and sacrifice of the soldiers on both sides that humanises the high cost of war.
Yep. And we are covering this for our patron pick for this month. And I want to say thank you to Ben Holhouse for nominating this fantastic film. So this is a 23-year-old movie about an engagement that happened over 60 years ago. Actually, 60 years this year. But we're still going to do spoiler-free thoughts. Yeah, it's always weird when it's like we're talking about an actual historical thing. So let's go ahead and jump into our Free thoughts for the popcorn ratings. So are we looking at this as stale, fresh, or buttered and salted film? Rory, why don't you go ahead and get us kicked off?
Yeah. Very succinct, really, as a British person commenting on someone else's foreign war films. But fresh, I would say. It's good setup. It's got great cast and performances, including Mel Gibson. Sam Elliott, I thought, wow. I thought I didn't notice him before. I'd noticed him in everything since then. Like Stars Born, I think he's in that as well. It's quite clearly in the era of those very visceral kind of battle scenes, like in Saving Private Ryan, has that huge effect. Because the brutality and the, whoa, I'm in the middle of the action, bullets flying over your head. And yeah, that's ultimately what made it a good war film with some great themes in there as well, which we'll get onto later. And yeah, so those are what are your thoughts, guys?
Yeah, how about you, Daniel? What rating are you going with?
It's a fresh for me. I'm kind of 50-50 on Randall Wallace as writer-director. On the one hand, sometimes it seems a little overwrought and a little on the nose, but boy, when it works, it really works.
Oh, yeah.
You can't argue with the Mel Gibson performance or Madeline Stowe or basically anybody else in this. I didn't think much of it I guess I was a teenager when this came out, kind of expecting, unfortunately, a little more action to it.
Yeah.
But this was more of a tribute to the troops, and that absolutely works. So I can't argue that it's ineffective at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went with, so I'll be the outlier. I went with buttered and salted. I've loved this movie for years. I first saw it when I was a teenager and would watch it over and over again. So it's one of the best movies, honestly, I've seen out there portraying veterans in a positive light, especially Vietnam veterans. It's a very unpopular war, and unfortunately, the soldiers that fought in it became unpopular because of that. And this film, it didn't get bogged down in any of the politics. It showed some of the stuff in the background, showed the, I don't know if I want to say the hubris. I was going to say the incompetence, but honestly, it was the hubris of the top brass. What they thought this war was going to be and what they were going to be able to do with it. I think it did. It's kind of a crazy thing. It did show the awesome might of the American military, though. Is like anytime that like they called in the air cavalry, I just got excited. Like, I mean, I've said this for years, my entire life. Is the military is one of the coolest things in the world. Like, they have incredible technology. It's just a shame what it has to be used for. It's so cool. But this film was solely about the men involved in that fight, and the film was made with tremendous care to get the story right. And yeah, Roy, you're right. Great cast, and to play off the full title of the book, and young
men.
The like going through the supporting actors list. I was going to call them characters, but they're playing real humans. Is seeing what is Mad Men from Mad Men? What's his name? He's in this, but he was
John Hamm.
Yeah, Sean Hamm. He's 30 years old. Matter of fact, he said I saw in trivia, he's going to give up acting if he didn't land something by the time he was 30. And he turned 30 while they were filming this. So this film had a lot of guys whose careers, before they really started to take off again, became household names. Again, this is 23-year-old movie now. So moving into the theology side, are we looking at this diluted, carbonated, or my cup runneth over? So Daniel, we'll actually go ahead and get you started with this. What rating for theology are you going with?
It's carbonated for me. Technically, it's a cup runneth over because there are a lot of themes. The only reason I go with carbonated is they're all so out front and in the open that there's not a whole lot left to discuss, but I know we're going to find plenty.
Yep. Rory?
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. It is carbonated. I mean, I didn't find it so fully, cup runneth over, but, I think Rand Wallace does a great job. He always has one theme he sticks to, and talk about family as one big thing that runs all the way through, like Braveheart is freedom, and just it's consistent and it is followed through all the way through into even the battlefield and at home as well, the home front, which often gets forgotten about. So well done for that, and hopefully dive it into the deeper themes of how that works out.
Yep, absolutely. So I went with carbonated as well. Daniel, I think I kind of agree with you. Is like some of the things I was like, I wanted to say butter, like I wanted to say cup runneth over, but it was a lot of like, there's so many good themes, so many things, and you could dive deep into any one of these, but I think carbonate is probably the best one to go with. Leadership is going to be my big takeaway from this. Hal Moore is the type of guy anyone would follow into battle. Because he leads you into battle. That's why. I was like, why do you follow someone that leads? Follow someone? It's because they're an actual leader, and so that's definitely my biggest takeaway with it. A lot of other themes too to go with, and we'll be breaking those out as we go on. But for right now, though, this episode of Popcorn Theology is actually brought to you by Claus Charity, an organization known for their unique approach to gift giving. This charity partners with local artisans and craftsmen to create one-of-a-kind, personalized gifts for children in need. Claus Charity believes that through the gift of creation, every child can feel seen, valued, and celebrated. Please visit their website at beclauscharity.com to donate. And again, that is BECLAUS charity.com. Donations are processed through Canada Helps, an organization with very low fees, allowing your donation to go as far as possible. Be sure to share the gift of creation with a child in need this Christmas at beclauscharity.com. And with that, we'll drop our other ads, and we'll be right back to discuss some more themes of We Were Soldiers.
Cinemagogue, The Marvelous Era. James Harleman here, the cinema guy, announcing the sequel to my first book on film and faith. Let's face it, entertainment has changed dramatically since the first book published in 2012, and comic book characters and franchises are everywhere. So I decided to set my sights on superheroes and examine the evolution of Hollywood in this follow-up to the first Cinemagogue book. For example, what does Loki tell us about culture's view of God? Why does the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Infinity Saga continually align with biblical themes? In the Marvelous Era, I review each film and show not only how the individual movies express gospel parallels, but each phase essentially reveals a multi-point sermon. I also explore DC, Star Wars, the Monsterverse, and more. Without compromising scriptural truth, we can sift these stories and discover how we might reject, receive, and redeem ideas for personal reflection and Christian conversation. Also, has Hollywood's messaging gotten worse? The book explores ways these marvelous mythologies correspond with conversion, Christian living, church history, and Reformation, but I do also highlight what has been the entertainment industry's darker, indoctrinating decade, as well as toxic fandom and the dangers of immersion in pop culture that just might drown us spiritually if we're not careful. So suit up, assemble, and join me on a journey to the Infinity Saga and beyond. Cinemagogue, The Marvel Us Era. Now available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle editions.
And we're back, dropping the spoiler warning as we dig deeper into We Were Soldiers. But before we get into that, Daniel was just showing us some of the cool stuff that he has in his possession. So, right, Daniel, why don't you show the audience what you got over there?
Just by sheer coincidence, I happen to have my little popcorn theology here.
Look at that. Nice.
For recording in the morning, I'm going to need that. A little bit of a waterback, also with a Popcorn Theology branded glass.
Fantastic.
And actually, literally by coincidence, I happen to have the little bumper sticker here. It's ready to go.
Excellent. David would be very happy to see that. And for those who I have this is a beach towel behind me, and then Rory's got a hat. I have a T-shirt and a hat as well, and not in the room with me. So if you would like merch and support, financially support us. Head over to the merch store and get some items. They're very well made stuff. Like everything that I've gotten has been great. But that's enough about that, though. Let's go ahead and start talking some deeper popcorn stuff. There it goes. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with you, Rory. You thought it was fresh, and so why is that? What were some things that stood out for you? And
absolutely. It's mainly about the story and the script. I think Randall Wallace, who he always picks a theme. I think this one is family, about the family, both between the soldiers, the brothers in arms kind of feel, as well as the sisterhood that develops and the familial sense that develops with the wives as well, who are left behind to deal with the consequences of the war and the grief that they have to share in as well of their loss. And it's not purely ideological at all. It's just steers clear of everything like that, and it's a very human story. And of course, I think Randall Wallace, I think, like Braveheart, he picks freedom. This one's about family. And Hacksaw Ridge is about faith. If I were to summarize it, broadly speaking, it kind of is. Yeah. He kind of picks that kind of theme in the face. And usually there's a war going on in a lot of his films. Braveheart, of course, being a bit more closer to home, if you didn't know already. The accent. So
well, geographically too.
Yeah, I know. Freedom. Anyway, I think that would make an interesting thematic trilogy as an aside anyway. But anyway, all three have that same kind of structure. You have the pre-war, the kind of build up and the building of the bonds, as it were, before we get into the main action. And yeah, it does that fairly well. If it works, use it again and again, and watch this for the first time since I gave a history presentation on this and other Vietnam War films for my final semester at university, where I just watched loads of films on a lot of different eras, and this was one of the ones I thought, Vietnam, there's a lot of films in that. Yeah, I like Rambo. Let's try.
Yeah.
Like Apocalypse Now and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is probably one of the better ones you watch, or at least more positive towards the soldiers and not show them as broken men or about PTSD and stuff. But no, I think you're onto something about the about Randall Wallace using like war as kind of a backdrop, because I forget which podcast I said it's on, or maybe I've just said it in other context, is war puts almost everything into perspective at an incredibly heightened level. It's what men men obviously gravitate towards it, and we love war movies and stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, war just puts everything into crystal clear focus, and that's how you can tell a story about freedom, family, or faith with war as a backdrop, because war cuts across all the BS that we put up with, in civil society, to be like, well, this is what it means to be faithful, and this is what it means to be a brother. Or this was like, where it's war movies. Just, no, I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to show you what it's like to actually do that when it actually matters. So no, thanks for that. So Daniel, how about yourself? You went with Fresh. And so what were your thoughts, likes, didn't likes, standout moments for you? And again, this is the spoiler-free section, so you can say whatever you want now.
The performances for me are kind of number one. It really does feel like from Randall Wallace on down, everyone's very sincere about this movie and trying to do the absolute best they can to pay tribute to these actual people. And of course, this came out in 2002, which is shortly after 9/11, and you can really feel that in the way that the warfare is presented, the way that troops are celebrated and presented. But even beyond that, just as far as acting goes, everyone's really engaged, everyone's really deep into it and really becomes someone else. That's, I think, what it's really all about. And that's what sells everything. That's why the very big dramatic moments and the deaths and everything else works the way that it does. It kind of comes from there and from that very sincere heart, I think.
Yeah, you could feel the deaths, actually.
Yes.
Whereas you actually, you felt it. You didn't want these people to die, which is, one, it's good filmmaking, but two, is like when it's an actual war, it brings it a lot more clarity for you. So I'd say this is a tough film, honestly, to talk about. So I went with Buttered and Salted, because the film did such a good job trying to honor those men, that to then have a podcast on it where we're going to critique it seems weird, But Moore and Galloway, sorry, excuse me. When they did their research for the book, they actually made sure to go and meet the Vietnamese general to understand his side of that battle. And so that's like the level of care that Moore and Galloway went to. And then I think the director made sure to take that same level of care. He even went as far as, like, when he was casting people, he made sure they resembled the soldiers from actually the 7th Cavalry, even background characters who had no speaking lines. They were cast as, people who were similar in appearance. And so they took a lot of care to make sure that someone who's conceivably watching their grandfather, just as a background character, would be like, oh, wow, that actually somewhat looks like grandfather was. I know Galloway was disappointed that they showed that one montage scene of taking the pictures and stuff, that they didn't use his actual photos. Instead, they had used, staged photos and stuff. But so that's the one of the only critiques I really saw of the film from people actually involved with it. But if you had asked me as 14-year-old when I first ever saw this versus 37-year-old now, what the standout moments were, they would be very, very different. Like 14-year-old loved all the battle scenes. Matter of fact, I've watched this movie. I don't know how many times I've watched this movie, but a lot of times when I was 14-year-old, I would skip the first half of the movie and just watch from when they landed to when when the battle concluded. And I honestly don't think I really fully understood like everything. Obviously, I knew it was war and those people like died and stuff, but I didn't really understand the context, particularly of like that brotherhood and what this film is about. But now 37-year-old me, any of the conversations between Moore and Plumlee, especially Plumlee's opinion of Custer, as a born and raised Virginian, I have very similar opinions of Custer. But absolute favorite scene, though, is, and I'll be talking about this as my main point, is Lieutenant Colonel Moore's speech that he gives to the men before they ship out. It's incredibly motivational, but it is brutally honest. And I think that's one of the things just throughout. I have several quotes from him throughout, but just throughout, he never minces words. It's like, men are going to die. You're going to be landing under fire, and men are going to die. And so with that, I mean, we are talking about a film about America's involvement in the war, but the film's not about the war itself. So we'll use this opportunity for a little bit to talk about the war itself, how we got into it, how we started it, or we didn't start it, but how we got into it. So with that, Rory, why don't you go ahead and, Mr. History Teacher, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Well, this is obviously, I'm writing it from a very British perspective, maybe there's some tinges there. Neutral, because Britain was
Can you
fairly...
speak in your BBC English, please, while you go through this?
Oh, I can't really pull it off for the whole thing. Yes, well, these silly Americans, and they're getting the wars and everything. Yes, no. But anyway, so why would people ask? Okay, you have all sorts of opinions on why the war is fought, but essentially, as you may already know, America. I'm talking to Americans here, but you still are kind of, the world foremost Western superpower versus the Soviets, of course, that emerged and became effectively a bit of a policeman over time. Incremental kind of, actually getting involved across the world, whereas America had been before World War II, quite inverted, I would say. Mm-hmm. And the British and French empires had been used to having all the power, but they're on the wane and trying to manage the decline, reassert their power, especially the French, who in themselves get involved in Indochina, as it was then called. They failed in the 50s because the Viet Cong, led by Ho Chi Minh, the nationalist leader and communist, actually defeated them on their home patch. And so the US thought, right, we've got to get involved in this. And incremental over time, this justification to fight, contain communism. If Vietnam fell, then others would fall. That domino kind of theory was seen as that way. And you had to support your anti-communist ally. You had to back the French. You had to back the South Vietnamese. So that was the foreign policy at the time. And the fact that they've said the Vietnamese weren't doing a great job meant the US, even after Kennedy and Johnson, had to kind of get sucked into where we get to Ia Drang. Because if you don't deal with them, these tiny little forces in the forests of Vietnam, you're going to look really weak to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And the Soviets will think, they're easy, aren't they? Because you're in that race. But the question was US comfortable being the world's policeman? Would they see through that commitment, or would they shirk that responsibility? That's kind of a question. And that's where we get to Ia Drang as the first major combat battle. And the UK were quite supportively neutral. We weren't involved militarily for various reasons we couldn't. We're just kind of managing our own decline of our own empire, selling it off, letting people go. But lots of protests, pro-peace movement. Even one of my lecturers from university as a student was arrested in one of those outside the US Embassy in London. It divided opinion across the world, and I'm sure it did in the US as much as it did. So anyway, that's my hopefully as factual summary of how you got into this, and without being too ideological there. What guys, how in America is this viewed? Maybe that's quite a good way to perhaps kind of jump off or hand over the baton to you guys. So that's my kind of semi-neutral historical perspective.
How about you, Daniel?
Yeah, I think that history's pretty much dead on. It's certainly still divisive, but I think that has cooled over the past couple of generations, where the people actually involved aren't so much involved in the conversation. I think it is still seen as a mistake, and there are ways it certainly is. I think overall it was a half-decent idea. Like Rory said, this almost ended up being a proxy war with Russia and so much China as well. Just a demonstration that we are willing to fight militarily, but without having to go into Russia or fight on our own soil or, God forbid, get in a nuclear conflict. So ultimately, I think it probably prevented a much wider war, but at the same time, you're fighting that war in someone else's country, taking heavy casualties on your own side and a lot of civilian casualties. And this also with a war of a soldier, mostly draftees, which at your training, not so much. It's mostly volunteer, but when you're just wiping out almost a generation of your own people, it can only last so long. And taking those kind of casualties, no matter how well it's technically going from a bird's eye view, is just not going to hold up with a civilian population.
This is one of those things where during this era of geopolitics, you honestly couldn't believe a thing that was out there. I mean, very much like today with like AI and all this stuff. It's like that was the age of propaganda. So the Soviets master with propaganda. America, great with propaganda. We have slightly different approaches to it, but I mean, the CIA was actively involved with a lot of stuff. All of our intelligence agencies were. It was the age of propaganda. But so a lot of people fell for it on both sides of it. But in all, I'll be a little bit more of the apologist. I'll say for the war is there is an existential threat of communism, and it is real. And I will die on this hill. # McCarthy did nothing wrong and didn't go far enough. And a lot of our leaders, they didn't know what was going to happen, like especially the whole like domino effect type of thing. Is honestly is a sound theory. Who knows if it actually would have happened or not? And communism actually mostly burned itself out, so maybe it wasn't necessary. Who knows? But especially after the Soviets got the bomb, we didn't know what was going to happen, and so fighting a proxy war is better than fighting a nuclear war. Number two is like our universities had already started to be taken over by the leftists, and they very heavily were carrying water for the communist movement. I mean, even people like one of our American senators, Bernie Sanders, honeymooned in Soviet Russia and was like, "Oh, this place is great." I mean, he basically went on a propaganda tour, and our universities were carrying water for the communist movement. A lot of our radicals of the '60s came out of our universities. I mean, honestly, they've been calling America fascist since the day after we defeated the fascists. We just, because of our free speech laws, and don't get me wrong, wonderful laws, it allowed them to carry a lot of water for communists and just muddy the waters. Number three, just like today, people will believe anything they see on TV without any reflection. So if the North Vietnamese said Americans were oppressors, then the Americans were the oppressors. I watched the video of XYZ thing that happened, and I don't need to know any context, and the Americans aren't saying it. No, the Americans aren't saying it because it's classified, but North Vietnamese are telling us the story, so we're just going to believe the one telling the story. Number 4, and this is honestly probably the biggest one, is the draft was incredibly unpopular. And I believe that one of the major reasons why the war itself is so unpopular is because of that draft. When the average American family involved gets to taste the consequences of the war, and again, involuntarily, because their sons were drafted and they experienced the consequences of war just becomes unacceptable. And then number 5 is people, and they still can't do it to this day. People couldn't separate holding their politicians to account and not demonizing the men who were actually sent into the world, into the war. And so this film, in my opinion, helps to rectify that, where it's, hey, we're not going to focus on the war itself or the politicians. We're going to focus on the men. And that means it's time to pour and sample more spiritual aspects of this film and its narrative. So we're going to shift some of those gears from talking about the popcorn side, the movie side, or even the war itself, and jumping right into our main themes. So Daniel, we'll go ahead and we'll start with you today. What's the main theme you got for us?
Well, like I said, there are a lot of themes in here. I guess the one I settled on is the kind of concept of never let them see you sweat as a sort of leadership phrase. There's a lot of sweating in this movie and throughout Vietnam. But what you see certainly early on is with Mel Gibson's character, he doesn't let it get to him in the moment. In the middle of a firefight, he is running the fight. He is issuing orders. He has people die in front of him, hands the radio to the next guy, and starts over. That's absolutely necessary in a situation like that where everyone is scared, everyone is in the same terrible situation, and somebody's got to be in charge and handle it. But in the right company, with his closest allies in the unit, with other leadership positions of people who aren't going to let it get out and affect morale or courage, he will sweat. He will let out what's bothering him. Towards the end, he says to Barry Pepper's character, who's a journalist, that I'll never forgive myself that my men died and I didn't. If he says that in the middle of a firefight, it's probably over already. But he knows how to carry it and when to let it out for himself. And that's something you can get straight from Jesus himself in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and watch with me. And he goes a little farther, and sweating blood says, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken away from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. They don't want to be there once they get there, even as voluntary soldiers. It's not the situation they expected, but they have to do it. And Mel Gibson has to make it look like they should be doing it, and has to be who kind of Sam Elliott already is just walking around pretending he's that guy. And then when it all comes to it, he does have to let it out because he is still a human being. And you may not be able to be Sam Elliott, but you can be a human being who handles it in the moment.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to respond to that. Yeah, it's really, the leadership qualities that he does to show Colonel Moore is very much not aloof. He's very much as part of the company. Like quite literally, he is first among equals primarily. I see that's kind of servant leadership that he does show right there. Daniel definitely can see that that he's involved in the lives of the men. He cares for his men. He listens to them, their fears, their thoughts, the feelings, and everything. It reminds me a lot of Jesus when he's talking in his last conversation with the disciples, saying, greater love has no man than this, that he lays his life down for his friends. And he's talking in that similar kind of few chapters of John about, I no longer call you master, but I call you friends and brother and things like that. You're that. Yeah, and Jesus has washed their feet, and he's got kind of feet washing kind of leader, isn't he? Intrinsically involved in their lives and cares for his men, and really it's a big responsibility, just like Jesus' big responsibility being savior of the world, the greatest responsibility of them all. In this case, he has to try and get as many of his men out of that situation or through that battle, but knowing full well, not everyone's going to come back. And that's really hard that you can't. That must be really hard for Colonel Moore that you can't take everyone back. You have to accept there are going to be casualties. That's.
Yeah, I didn't. I meant to pull this verse up earlier, but forgot to add it in. But about very much a King David type of approach, where this is before he's actually king, or he's out in he's out on the run, running from Saul, and his men. David's thirsty. He's thirsty, and his men go, and through incredible peril, they go and get David water, and they bring it to him. And then he's like, "No, how can I do this? These men risk their lives for me." And he pours the water out, and it's that level of leadership of, I'm not going, just because I'm, well, you said first among equals, I'm not going to push that claim. I'm not going to push that and make you guys become my servants. No, I'm here because of my responsibility as the leader. I'm actually here to make your lives better. I'm here to protect you from folly. I'm here to provide you with the protection. One of the scenes that struck me, and it's talking about just the leadership and how he cares for his men, what he understood, what was going on, is it showed this one scene where they, the Viet Cong, they're moving their troops, and it's focused on the Viet Cong general, and it goes, focus all your attention on the creek bed, and then it cuts right over to Colonel Moore, and it goes, it's like, we need to secure that creek bed right away. You need to do this, and he understood what was going on, because he cared so much about his men. He was studying so much because he knew men were going to die. And his whole thing now was, men are going to die. So how do I mitigate how many men die? And that's where the good general, comes in. That's where good, he's not a general, but that's where good leader comes in. And he stayed with his men. He made a promise to his men that he'd be the first one on and the last one off. And he kept that promise, even though and I think, not to get into too deep of theology, because it's not the space for this one, I think that's probably a very applicable example of the rule of the lesser magistrate, where the lesser magistrate can tell the upper brass of, no, this is where my responsibility actually is. And so I'm going to do what's best for them, even though you want me to go back home because you don't want to lose. I mean, it's like, losing draftees is not what was the line? Losing draftees is not the big deal, but losing a lieutenant colonel, that's a massacre. It's like the uncaringness of the top brass, but then you get someone like Colonel Moore who is going to be, no, I'm going to die with my men, and he was fully prepared to die with his men. But kind of like Stonewall Jackson, he was like comfortable in battle, because he knew God was the one that was ultimately in control, so he wasn't going to worry about it. And if he died in that moment, he died in that moment. But if not, he was going to continue to fight for his sons and brothers and grandfather. So, Rory, but talking about grandfather, talking about family, what do you got for us?
Yeah, well, we are all family. If that doesn't sound an earworm, I don't know what does. But no, generally, that leader, he's a father figure as well, that as part of this family. I love it in the film where he tells the story of Crazy Horse. He's telling it to his men. And when Crazy Horse was a baby, he says he nursed at the breast of every woman in the tribe. Context, Crazy Horse was the one killed at Little Bighorn? No. Was it? No.
I forget.
I forget.
But
anyway,
I know he was a great warrior. I know that.
A great warrior that obviously fought valiantly as well. Anyway, and the Sioux tribe raised their children that way. And every warrior called every woman in the tribe mother. Every older warrior they called him grandfather. Now, the point here, as Colonel Moore is saying, is that they fought as a family. Take care of your men. Teach them to take care of each other. Because when this starts, each other is all we're going to have. Wow. That is one great line there, isn't there? And it reminds me as well, like that caring, when Jesus is asked, "Who are your mothers? Who's your brothers?" Your Jesus' mother and brothers arrived in Mark 3, and they said, "Oh, your mother and brothers are out here looking outside for you." And then Jesus, rather enigmatically, says, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Yeah, and we're asking that too, like Mary, James, all the other guys, right? Anyway, and then it's then Jesus, it says, he looked at those seated in the circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." So in a sense, there's parallels there, doing the will of carrying out the mission of the will of that the 7th Cavalry and the US military, in that sense, is that those who carry out the orders and fight for each other, those people are your brothers, and those on the home front as well, who are consoling each other with the grief of the loss of those brothers, are like sisters to one another as well. Mm-hmm. And I guess the mothers to their sisters' children, basically, and so on. So that sense of sisterhood and brotherhood is very much, that's the church. We can talk about the human family, nuclear family, but the church as well has some parallels in its mission in a hostile, dangerous world and territory, with everyone wanting to take pot shots at you as well. The gospel goes out, but we are commanded to go out together as mother, brothers, sisters, sons, as you might say as well. So I can see some parallels there with the church and with a military unit as well. Onward Christian soldiers, someone might say.
Onward Christian soldiers, yes, absolutely. My first thought when I'll go off the "we are" motif is we are sons, and this is in Hebrews. It says, "Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted in your struggle against sin. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. And that's the beauty of, we've talked about this before in different contexts, is it's not that God picks us up and cleans us up. It's God adopts us and makes us sons. And what that looks like, it looks like discipline. It looks like, with Lieutenant Moore, I mean, if he was a weak man, he would have let his sons, he wouldn't have disciplined them, he wouldn't have done it, and then they would have gone, and it would have been a massacre. It would have been a slaughter. But he disciplined them so that when they were in the moment of crisis, and they were in the moment of war, when all of reality becomes incredibly heightened, they could protect each other's backs because they were sons and brothers and fathers and grandfathers, all in that fight. Because that's, at the end of the day, is all what they had.
Agreed. That's all they had. And combat itself, I would say, adds the kind of context that they're in, would properly discipline themselves and refine them. There's that refining thing. I think that discipline is meant to be for our good, because it will refine you. So as much as the training is up to the point when you're in the heat of battle, that's really where the proper refining and finding out who you are as well, and your character has been shaped by those experiences as well. God can use that. I think Romans 8 would say, God, that God's working through all these things and actually for your good to shape you more like Jesus as well. These sorts of experiences as well as sons as well. You can cry Abba, Father to him as well. So that's that flip side as well, that we do have, as Colonel Moore does call out. He calls out Father. That he does praying. He's praying in chapel. He's praying in the middle of the battlefield as well, in the watch of the night as well. I think I could hear him in the middle of I think it was like a few psalms he might have done. I can't remember but anyway, if he were, there are quite a few, in fact, a few combatant psalms, aren't there? The arrow by day and the terror of the night. Yes.
Yep. Yeah,
terror by night.
That's one. I was the 91st Psalm. That was actually one of the
Psalm 91 comes to mind.
Psalms
yeah,
that I was actually gonna pull up for mine, but I was.
I won't steal your thought.
No, I didn't, but that's why I'm glad you referenced it. Is God doesn't shy away from the war motif. He is the warrior, and I was describing this to someone yesterday. Is God designed man capable of war, but it's not what he designed man for. And so, and that's one of the things that we as men need to understand. Is like, as much as we love war films and stuff, is it's not what we are on this planet for, but he gave us the capability of it for defense against the enemy, against those who come to crush, kill, and destroy. And that's what we use our strength for, but that's not. It's not its final purpose. Its final purpose is building up, and is being those leaders. It's a shame that where we get the greatest leaders is out of war, but that's to our chagrin and our detriment. Where God Himself is the greatest warrior. He uses warfare language. This idea of us. We are the church militant. We are a marching army. It's just our weapons of war are different, but it still is that same heightened sense of war that we're engaged in. That we understand the ultimate things. If war makes you realize all the important things on the earthly realm, then spiritual warfare makes you understand the realities of the sense of the ultimate thing that's going on with us.
I think that goes back to your point that on the battlefield, each other is all they have. That is what the church should be. Mm-hmm. We see the value of community in this movie. Even, I think I said I was a teenager before, probably in my 20s when I saw this. Even back then, the kind of heroism at home between the women, I think it's still the best part of the movie.
Yeah.
I've never seen that in a movie before, and it works so much better than you could possibly plan for. Great performances, of course, but just a great concept of what it takes back home to keep things running overseas. And then when you get overseas, of course, you have us, you have the church, you have each other. This is why we confess our sins to each other. This is why we meet weekly or more. This is part of the process, I think, of casting our anxieties on Jesus like He asks us to do. That's hard to do, and He acknowledges there are going to be anxieties. We're going to be in deep fights that we do not expect.
Yes.
And we've got to have someone next to us because we are human.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I think I agree with you. That was when I first saw it, I thought, wow, this is powerful. We don't get this in many films. I think other films have tried it since. But it's that human face, the fact that they're getting telegrams that from people who they don't know and from far away, that instant reaction. Back then they didn't have the internet or Twitter or email, things like that. But imagine someone who's not connected with you delivering the worst news possible, but actually them sitting with a human face. It's community. It's like with the face, it's like like I said, the church and the community are meant to be pointing to our great high priest who knows every one of our weaknesses. Who can empathize in every single way. Not through a telegram. It's not. We don't get the gospel or church through telegrams or messages. It's through human beings like ourselves and community. So, yeah,
absolutely. So to move on, my point, because it is connected through the leadership. Is my theme was last man on. First man on, last man off. And what struck me obviously is his speech and stuff, but his conversation with his daughter, and his daughter says, "Daddy, what is war? War is something that shouldn't happen, but it does. It's when one country tries to take the life of another country, and then soldiers like your daddy, it's my job to go over there and stop them. And daughter, are you going to Are they going to take your life, Daddy? They're going to try to Cecil, but they won't. And it reminded me of Ecclesiastes 8, verse 8 to 9. It says, "No man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt." And just that conversation between father and daughter of, here's this warrior, this man who is having to leave the thing he loves so that he can protect the thing he loves. It's always that dichotomy of like, to do what's best for my family, I actually have to leave my family 8 hours a day to go to go to work and have a job and do all this. But the thing I want to be is with my family. And that's what life is like under the sun. You have to make those drastic type of choices. And again, war turns it up to the 100th degree of, no, now you have to go across seas and across this, and you have to, unfortunately, what he says is something that shouldn't happen, but it does. And the way he handles that and the way he talks with his men regarding it, in that speech, the powerful speech, is that we're moving into the valley of the shadow of death, where you will watch the back of the man next to you as he will watch yours, and you won't care what color he is or by what name he calls God. They say we're leaving home. We're going to what? No, so no, we're going to what home was always supposed to be. Now let us understand the situation. We are going into battle against a tough and determined enemy. I cannot promise you that I will bring you all home alive, but this I swear before you and before Almighty God, that when we go into battle, I will be the first to set foot on the field, and I will be the last to step off, and I will leave no one behind, dead or alive. We will all come home together. So help me God. And this is, again, just talking about his leadership capability. Is he's talking with his men. It's like, to follow your instincts and to inspire men by your example, you have to be with them. Where the metal meets the meat. We will be landing under fire, gentlemen. Men will die.
Wow.
And again, if we just left this as a non-Christian film, or weren't trying to analyze it, we'd just be like, oof, like all this weightiness, but we'd still be living under that life under the sun when man had power over men to their hurt. But what does the Bible actually say about the shadow of death? It says from the 23rd Psalm in verse 4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And in Hebrews, Rory already mentioned the sympathetic high priest is in Hebrews. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. And this is the thing about Christ, is this is why this became this film, again, even though it's a true story and it's based on true story, this is why this is a life transcendent film and not a life under the sun film, is because even in these moments, it's pointing towards Christ. It's pointing towards a better country, a better home. It's a place where the maker and builder is Christ. And so is Christ. He's the first fruit. He is the first fruit that set foot. He's the first to set foot on the new creation. He is the one who is putting all enemies under his feet. Again, he's the great warrior. I mean, it's in one of the Psalms, it literally describes, it said, God is a warrior, like flat out. It's like, that's the end of sentence. He is the greatest warrior. But because Christ's victory is ultimate, he actually never has to leave the field. He never has to step off. He has accomplished what he needs to accomplish. And using the motif from the book of Hebrews, Lieutenant Moore is to Moses as Christ. And so Christ is described as the greater Moses. Moses and the other high priests, all previous high priests, they sacrificed, and then they had to sacrifice, and they had to sacrifice. In the context of this, Lieutenant Moore gets on the battlefield and has to leave. He gets on the battlefield and has to leave. Gets on the battlefield and has to leave. But Christ, as he's the head of the house, and Moses was a steward over that house, so Christ is the supreme commander who never has to leave the battlefield. He's the first one on, but he never leaves. He's there throughout generation, throughout generation, throughout generation. And on top of that, when he wins, when his battle is done, it's the ultimate done. It's ultimately a win. And men like Hal Moore, they're the faithful soldiers. They're the foot troops, but Christ is the one who's the commander and doing it. This is why we honor men like Lieutenant Colonel Moore and their faithful duty, not just to God obviously, but also to their country. And this is why movies like this need to be made, and why they need to be made with care, is so that we can respect the men that were involved with it, but also it points us to the final home, the final resting place. And we can lean into the motifs of war, because God leans into the motifs of war. God himself is a warrior, but we know that there is a final rest, and that Christ has accomplished that rest for all of us.
Yeah, amen to that. Wow. Wow. I just want to respond to some of that. Is that, the fact you mentioned Psalm 23 just brings to mind a lot of things about Jesus going through that death's valley of the shadow, and literal valley of the shadow, and Ayadrang as well. There's great motifs there, isn't there? Like you picked up there, so wonderfully expounded that as well. Thinking that Jesus going through that valley was led by his own Father, Heavenly Father, through that. So in my view of the Psalms, a lot of it's basically Jesus experienced that and is talking to his own Father in that, and his own experience went and lived it out. That's what the Psalms are. A lot of them are about, and fulfillment. But that rod, that kind of discipline we talked about, just evokes those sorts of things like correction, pastures green, enjoyment. There are some pastures, but to get through them, you have to get to the valleys. And the oil anointing, the Spirit of God is helping you, and through empowering you as well, but also, as well. And feast before my enemies. The cross, I think, was often said. A cross, the most in humiliation, he's still able to be victorious in some sense.
Yep.
And resurrect himself. So that kind of pastoral leadership that we have in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit together, the Godhead, that is a real something to latch on to in our own dark valleys, our own shadows that we do go through at many different times and periods of our own lives that we will face, and some may die. You want to follow the quotation: "Men will die and fall around you." It's guaranteed, just like real life. If that film is a microcosm of, if not a reductio absurdum of what life is men will die.
Yep.
And we're going to have to get through the terrors of night and the hours by day, like we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And Jesus says, talking about context of Christians, is they're going to hate you on my account. And if that's not and you will die, you type of quote. And Hebrews talks about that hall of faith, the hall of fame, hall of faith, it goes through, in Hebrews, goes through all of this list of all these heroes, and then goes, and some were torn in two, and some were fed to lions, and some were this, and the world wasn't worthy of them. And that's the thing, the faith comes with that thing. God adopts us through Jesus. He sanctifies us. He does all this wonderful stuff for us. He takes out our sin and gives us his righteousness. It's a very aspirational quote. He said, "This is how the world always supposed to be, but men will die because we are at war. We are at war here." And as we can watch fantastic films that depict it, it just again brings that heightened sense back to us. So before we move on to the lightning round, Daniel, do you have anything to add before we jump over the lightning?
I guess really briefly, just about a lot of things, but about Vietnam specifically. There's a book called On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. a lot of it's kind of iffy in some of the theories, but one thing I think it really gets right about soldiers and about PTSD more broadly is in World War II, if you went home, you got on a boat and you were still among the military, you were with people who were deep in it with you in a war, and you had that time to sort of decompress and debrief, and maybe weeks, maybe a month before you have to go back home. In Vietnam, if you go home, you go from the battlefield to a plane back to Hill Valley and back to the future.
Oh, wow.
No one has any idea what's going on over there, how much different it is from World War II, from Korea, and if you're not back on base, you're pretty much isolated. Unless someone else comes home, unless other people in your town were there. And he theorizes that's probably what leads to a lot of the trauma you see in Vietnam that you don't necessarily see everywhere else and see it so widespread. And there's a line in this movie, Barry Pepper gets to know another soldier who gets grievously wounded. And as the medic is treating him, he tells Barry Pepper, you know him, talk to him. And I think that's a pretty good way to go if you see someone who is hurting, if you see someone who has that kind of trauma, if you know them at all, even if you don't know trauma, if you don't have that kind of thing hanging over you, just talk to them. You might hear some things you'll never forget, or you might just have a pleasant conversation. But either way, just keep them talking, make sure they know someone's there, and I think that can go a long way.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. All right, before we wrap up this episode, what are some other themes that we can receive, reject, or redeem in this? So in the notes, it doesn't look like anyone has anything outright to reject on this one. So we'll just go ahead and move right into redeem. So I'll go ahead and just read it, and then we'll redeem it. Is Moore, he's in the chapel, and he has this fantastic prayer. Our Father in heaven, before we go into battle, every soldier among us will approach you, each in his own way. Our enemies, too, according to their own understanding, will ask for protection and for victory. And so we bow before your infinite wisdom. We offer our prayers as best we can. We pray you watch over young Jack, that I lead into battle. You use me as your instrument in this awful hell of war to watch over them, especially if they are men like this one beside me, deserving a future in your blessing and goodwill. Amen. And then it'd be a straight up receive if you didn't then add this. Oh, yes. And one more thing, dear Lord, about our enemies. Ignore their heathen prayers and help us blow those little bastards straight to hell. Amen. So it's funny. It's great. It knocks you off. But if maybe you can massage it, whereas in precatory psalms and stuff like that, I mean, David himself did. But a fundamental thing is if the enemy, say, is actually praying to God, actual God, then they're not heathens, and that no, God has just as much right to answer their prayers as he does the American prayer. And so it's because, as we know this, you can only pray to one deity accurately, and that is God through Christ as mediator and through the Spirit. And so if they're not praying to God, then they are heathens at the end of the day. But that's kind of like the redeemed, just throw out that last part, and this is a fantastic prayer about protection. And I said you could massage it a little bit and make it, this is just the imprecatory, in the vein of the imprecatory psalms that David did. But also David was talking about literal heathens and pagans, whereas this is seeming to conflate one group of Christians praying versus another group of Christians praying, and you shouldn't be doing imprecatory psalms against your fellow Christians. So that's my redeem off that prayer.
I've got receive, I think. I think that my receive is every side of battle has human beings. No matter what side you're fighting on, you're fighting, dying for each other, and every soldier has a family too. And we're not talking about in the sentimental way, can't kill them, but in a sense, there are sacrifices on all sides. And I like the touch at the end where they're going through the dead corpses of the Vietnamese and going through, and they find that actually one of them's got a diary, one's might have a wife back home that they're perhaps caring for as well, and want to write these notes back, get them back to them as well. Because I think that's the same soldier that we see towards the midpoint of the film as well, go into battle, putting that red booklet and notebook in there. So we all want to receive that wholeheartedly. That everyone's still part of the human family, as it were. And if war is a horrible thing, not something you want to fight lightly.
Yep.
Because it's effects.
And put off of your receive there is the quote from from Jack. It's actually right before the prayer happened that I just quoted. Is Jack says, Barbara and I spent a year in Africa. We helped build a school for orphans. They were orphans because the warlord across the border didn't like their tribe. I know that God has a plan for me. I just hope it's to help protect orphans, not make any. And again, it brings what you're just saying, the human aspect of it is fact of the matter. One, unfortunately, he created an orphan. Well, I mean, his wife's still there, but his child will grow up without a father because he was in war. But as we said at the top, is war something that happened? Is something that shouldn't happen, but it does. And then you need men like Jack to go and do that. But you need to never remember. But you never want to never forget that there actually is humans on both sides. And maybe it's great for propaganda. Maybe it's great for that. The old joke is like, I've never killed a man. I've only killed communists. And it's like, yeah, it's a great joke. It's funny, but it is fundamentally dehumanizing someone who God purposefully created and is bearing his image. And that's why, it's like to take a human life is not a light thing in the eyes of God, that he reiterates it multiple times throughout scripture that when you're attacking my image bearers, you're attacking me. And so don't do that lightly. And we need to remember as Christians, as any soldiers, as anything, that we are dealing with image bearers, and we need to treat them with the respect that God actually wants us to put towards them. So with that, we'll go ahead and roll the credits on this episode. Daniel, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming on and providing some insight and some points. Really appreciated it. Rory, always a pleasure to have our British correspondent come on and provide that neutral perspective on American stuff. You've been on several episodes where it's been a distinctly American issue, and you've brought some good insights. So.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So until next time, keep engaging movies and media from a godly worldview, and remember, you are not a mindless consumer.
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.